Be honest. Have you ever looked at yourself one day and thought, I don't even feel like me anymore? Not because something dramatic happened overnight, but because little by little, you kept settling. Settling for less than what you needed. Settling for things you said you'd never accept. Settling for behavior you used to question until eventually you stopped questioning it. And that's how it happens. Not all at once. Slowly, quietly, in ways you barely notice at first. Because settling, it doesn't always feel obvious. Sometimes it feels practical. Sometimes it feels mature. Sometimes it feels like you're just trying to make things work, trying to be understanding, trying to be patient, trying not to give up too quickly. But there's a difference between being patient and slowly abandoning yourself. And a lot of people don't realize when that shift happens. At first, you still speak up. You still say what bothers you. You still notice what doesn't sit right. But over time, you stop bringing things up. You stop asking for what you need. You stop expecting things to change. Because part of you already knows you're going to be disappointed again. And disappointment changes people. Not always loudly. Sometimes disappointment makes you quieter. Makes you lower your expectations. Makes you stop hoping as much. And that's where settling gets dangerous. Because eventually, you stop noticing how much you've changed. You become more tired, more emotionally drained, less excited, less expressive. You laugh less. You question yourself more. You become someone who tolerates things you never thought you would. And that's hard to admit. Because nobody wants to say, I stayed too long. Nobody wants to admit, I accepted less than what I deserved. But let's be real. A lot of people don't settle because they don't know better. They settle because they're afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of losing history. Afraid of choosing themselves and regretting it. So instead of leaving, they adjust. They shrink. They compromise parts of themselves to make the situation easier to survive. And survival mode changes you. Because when you're constantly trying to keep peace, you stop asking yourself if you're really happy. Be for real. How many times have you told yourself, it's not that bad? I can deal with it. Maybe I'm expecting too much. That's how settling talks. It doesn't always sound dramatic. It sometimes sounds reasonable. Sometimes it sounds like logic. Sometimes it sounds like maturity. But deep down, you know the difference between peace and simply getting used to disappointment. And getting used to disappointment can become a habit, a dangerous one. Because eventually, you stop believing you deserve more. You stop expecting better. You stop imagining a version of your life where you actually feel fulfilled. And that's the real cost of settling. It doesn't just affect your relationships. It affects how you see yourself. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop honoring your boundaries. You stop listening to the version of you that used to speak up. And maybe that's why some people feel lost. Not because they don't know who they are, but because they spent so long adjusting, they forgot what it feels like to be fully themselves. At some point, you have to ask yourself something honest. Am I choosing this because it feels right or because it feels familiar? Because familiar and healthy are not always the same. You can survive something and still admit it's not good for you. You can care about people and still realize you've outgrown what you accepted before. And that doesn't make you selfish. That makes you aware. Awareness is uncomfortable because once you see what settling has done to you, you can't ignore it. You start realizing how often you stayed quiet, how often you talked yourself out of your own feelings, how often you settled just to avoid being alone with yourself. And maybe that's where change starts. Not with blaming anyone else, not with anger, but with honesty. Honesty about what this has cost you. Honesty about who you've become. Honesty about what you've been tolerating, because you deserve to feel like yourself again. Not the version of you that's surviving. Not the version of you that's shrinking. The real you. If this hit, maybe it's time to stop asking, why do I feel so disconnected? And start asking, what have I been settling for? Because sometimes you don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself little by little every time you settle for less than what you truly need. And if this hit, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, because this is the kind of real conversation we're having over here. Sass with Faith. Real talk, real faith.